Welcome to Have History Will Travel. I am your host, the Wilder Historian, and I'm here to bust another myth today. Civil War history buffs normally refer to the Union's treatment of Confederate civilians in the South at large as a total war. I am going to contest that statement. Using Ohio State University professor Mark Grimsley's book, Hard Hand of War, I will outline why the Civil War cannot be considered a total war. The use of total war to describe the American Civil War proliferated after World War II, where the saturation bombings and mobilizing the economy towards the war effort characterized that war. Grimsley points out that we do not see that level of dedication or destruction found in the Civil War. Developing a hard war policy rather than a total war strategy developed in 3 steps. First, conciliation. Abraham Lincoln and most Northerners early on believed that the root of secession laid in the 1% slave power of the South, and that the entire Southern states were not completely on board with rebellion. This changed over time, and so did the policy dealing with civilians. However, while that idea floated through the minds of the Union, armies who moved into the Confederate territory produced a policy of conciliation, where soldiers shied away from foraging from the countryside and relied mainly on the supplies provided them by the Union High Command. Federal commanders repeatedly reprimanded and preached conciliation to their soldiers so not to disturb the populace. Their fight was with the Confederate armies, not Confederate civilians. Second, the pragmatic approach. Union armies moving through the South noticed that situations appeared that many times remained out of their hands, and so measures had to be taken, particularly against civilians. For example, by the summer of 1862, Union armies had made great headway into Tennessee and Mississippi, and suffered defeats in the east around Richmond. This gave ample experience to the armies that were not dealing with the 1% slaveocracy. There was a majority of Southerners pushing the war effort. Units and armies found themselves in territory where army supplies were scarce, and the only way to survive was to take from civilians. Normally not to a destructive level, but definitely enough to keep troops alive and fed until they reached adequate supplies elsewhere. Furthermore, slaves flocked to the Union lines. This forced the United States to deal with the tools of the South to make food and build fortifications coming to them for aid. That introduced the first Confiscation Act, and subsequently the Emancipation Proclamation. Third, a hard war. When one thinks of total war, one thinks of soldiers set loose upon populations with no concern over what happened because it was simply war. Grimsley points out that Grant, whether he was capturing Vicksburg or orchestrating attacks against Lee in the east, never allowed his soldiers to do as they pleased to Confederate civilians. It can be more easily described as directed severity, meaning that yes, there were resources destroyed because it prevented the enemy from obtaining them, but it was directed at select locations and did not cover the whole South. He also points out that soldiers showed restraint, and those who didn't were reprimanded for their actions. All in all, this was not a total war, but a hard war. Actions were taken against civilians, but it was directed and confined, and was not a policy that covered the whole South, only certain resources. Grimsley does a great job of illustrating how military policy changed based on the interaction of Civil War armies. I hope you all enjoyed the video. This was a fun one to make. If you want to read the book, I have included a link in the description. Thank you all and have a great day.